Hey everyone! Today I'm going to be going over Unit 1 for AP Comparative Government and Politics. So, essentially, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to go through each of the course and exam description topics for this unit, and every unit actually. This is just the starting point. We'll go through each of them individually, and I'm trying to go at a pretty in-depth level to really help discuss the concepts and the examples, because this course covers 6 different countries, which is a decent amount to cover in such a short amount of time. So I'm really excited about this. I put a decent amount of work and research into these PowerPoints, and I'm hoping to share a lot of information with you to help you for your class, as well as that AP exam. May the luck be in your favor. I don't know if that's how it goes. May the odds be in your favor, or something like that. Anyways, I do want to emphasize that I have resources available for you. You can have guided notes to follow along with the lecture. There's also some practice tests as well that I've created. They're a little long. The MCQ test is like 68 questions, and that's just for this unit. That's longer than the AP exams, multiple choice sections, but that just goes to show how much you need to know from this unit. And then the FRQ test, those are 4 FRQs, and they cover a good range of topics as well. And then I have a key terms lists. They're just an empty set of key terms for you. You can go out, find definitions, examples, graphs, pictures, whatever you want. It just gives you a basis of specific vocab that you need to know. I also do want to emphasize the course and exam description. So this is a document created by the College Board. And this document is very important because it tells you what's on the AP exam. If it's not in this course and exam description, you don't really need to know it. So one thing that teachers really like to emphasize in this class is the history of the 6 countries, particularly from maybe the mid-1800s to now. And some of that history is kind of important because it impacts the political systems today. But a lot of it, and most of it, is not necessary to succeed in this class and understand what we have to learn. So I will teach you any history that you need to know, and that is detrimental to learning this content. And this document also goes over how the FRQs are structured, how the multiple choice is structured. It goes over the different skills you have to know, because not only do you have to learn specific content, which they do a very good job of outlining, you also have to learn different skills on how to apply and explain and compare this content. And they give you a brief overview of what those skills are and when you will need to apply them. It's very, very helpful. It's a little long, but it's definitely helpful in understanding what you need to know for this class. So let's get started here with 1.1, Comparative Government, the systematic study and comparison of diverse political systems in the world. You don't have to memorize that, but that's just a very, 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 very short definition of comparative government. So essentially, we are comparing political systems. Political systems are not uniform in nature. They have different functions depending on what systems you're looking at. Even within a country, you have your local systems and you have your federal systems. Like, let's take the United States, for example. You have your county governments, which also have your state governments, and then you have your federal governments. And the United States is part of a variety of international organizations as well that have their own systems and their own political impacts on our country. Now, this course doesn't emphasize anything in the United States. You will not be asked about the United States at all. So that's pretty much the last American analogy I'll probably give. You're welcome. So we're going to be looking at 6 different political systems that are present in the world. We're looking at Iran, which I may say Iran, Iran, it really doesn't matter. Russia, United Kingdom, Nigeria, Mexico, and China. They're all very different, but they also have some similarities to them, and we're going to look at all of them. So first we got to look at measuring different measurements, different units that political scientists often utilize. So the first one is HDI scores. And this is a map at a global scale because we're looking at the globe. And it's displaying the Human Development Index scores. That's what HDI stands for, Human Development Index. And it's displaying them by a country basis, or a country scale of analysis. So this score is considered empirical data. Now, what does that mean, empirical data? Well, I don't have a key here, which is really bad on my part, but the key would show that different shades represents different physical quantities, different numbers, because HGI is not a ranking. It's not ranked on 1 to 100. They do rank countries, but they rank the countries based off of a actual score, an actual number, a measurement. So what does that have to do with empirical data per se? Well, empirical data is information that is based off of, you could say, experimentation. It's very factual, it's objective, it's numerical. Sometimes it may be normative data, which we'll get into, that's numerical. But this is mostly your statistics. So if you're given a percentage, for example, the like percentage of people that have a bachelor's degree in a country, that's empirical data. And that can be done through surveying, or that can be done by actually polling every single person in a country. So in a lot of countries, they conduct a census for population. That's empirical data. HGI scores is a great example of empirical data. Empirical information is used very commonly by political scientists to apply concepts, support generalizations, and make arguments. Arguments and conclusions in political scientists often center on relationships between variables. We're looking at that in just a second. So these are our three variables that impact an HGI score. This is it. So we have knowledge. So we're really looking at education rates. We're not looking at, let's say, literacy rates. That's maybe something that you'll see maybe on the multiple choice section of the exam to try to trick you up. But knowledge, education rates, those are the two ways to say it, as well as healthcare and standard of living. Healthcare impacts your life expectancy, and standard of living is a sign of that economic development. Obviously, countries with higher economic development are going to have a higher standard of living because they can afford those delicacies, and what makes a higher standard of living a higher, wealthier standard of living. So United Kingdom is obviously going to have a higher standard of living than Nigeria. I mean, look at it. United Kingdom is very dark green, which means a higher HGI score. In Nigeria, it's orange. It's not red like other countries like Mali, but Mali, I don't know. I don't care. And it's definitely not as dark as United Kingdom, and it's not as green as China or Mexico. China and Mexico are lime green, which demonstrates very similar levels of HGI scores. Now, they're not exact, but they are very similar. They're certainly better than that of Nigeria. And now Iran. Now, which one's Iran? A lot of students mix this up. So I'm actually going to pull out the PowerPoint laser pointer, which is really cool. Here you go. You see it? This is Iran, whatever you want to call it, right here. That's our focus for this course. And that's also lime green. So that demonstrates a relatively similar HGI score to China and Mexico. Now, what was our last country? Russia. This one right here. It's darker than China and Iran and Mexico, but it's not as dark as United Kingdom. So that means that Russia has a higher HDI score than these three countries and Nigeria, but a lower HGI score than the United Kingdom. So we can conclude that Russia is not as developed. So let's get rid of that laser pointer. All right, here's some more information. You might see something like this on the AP exam. You'll see surveying, or you might get an article with a lot of statistics. So like, they surveyed this many people about this subject that's happening in this country. And they'll give you like 3 questions related to that. Those are typically easier questions. We got to be able to read these types of graphs and all that fun stuff. Your FRQ number 2 has a question where you have to read a graph or a table like this and answer questions just based off reading the graph. So it's not even going to ask you, like they will ask you like relations to AP content, but there are going to be questions simply on reading a graph, and those are supposed to be freebie. So we're going to get some practice in with reading graphs. That's literally the first thing we're doing. So this is, how do people in China view America? And just a bunch of information here. It's probably, It's probably formulated by polling. And it's another example of empirical data. It's very, very sharp statistics. It's objective. Yeah. It's also quantitative data, and I didn't discuss this on the last slide. So what is quantitative data? Well, do you see this prefix quantitate? quantit, as however you want to say it. That means numerical. It means a number. So we have, let's see, you have an unfavorable opinion in the United States. 45.4% agree. That's a quantity. That's what makes this quantitative data. The other one that you need to know is qualitative data. And I'm emphasizing the qual prefix of it, qualitative. That stands for quality. And that's really anything that doesn't have anything to do with numbers. So you ask someone, do you like the United States? And they say no. That's qualitative. No numerical value in that. If I ask someone what their favorite country is and they say Russia for whatever reason, that's qualitative data. Now, if you ask them, if you don't ask, but if you actually, you could ask. If you poll 100 people and you ask them if they like the United Kingdom or Russia better, and you get a response that's 80 people prefer the United Kingdom, that's quantitative data because that 80 is a numerical value. Now we'll look at a different value, graduation rates in Nigeria. So this is more empirical data, very objective, very factual. It's not really a value statement. It's not based off of opinions or beliefs, which is like your normative data. It's also more quantitative data. We're dealing with numbers as well. And I do want to emphasize the trend that we see here. So what's the trend that we can conclude based off this graph? We can conclude that graduation rates in Nigeria are growing. That is our conclusion that we have drawn. It really started growing in about 2005, 2006, 2007-ish, and it's continued to grow up until 2014. And I could probably have given you a more updated graph, but I didn't. You just gotta work with that. College Board, typically in the AP exam, doesn't cover anything within the past 5 years. So if there's been a big event like Russia and Ukraine, you probably won't see on the AP exam quite yet. They're just now probably starting to put Brexit on there. And if you don't know what that is, it's the United Kingdom withdrawal from the European Union, which we'll cover a good bit. Even in this unit, we'll discuss. So what are graduation rates increasing? And that's not what I was supposed to say. Where's my pen? It's supposed to say why are graduation rates increasing. So why are graduation rates increasing? Well, Jerry Seinfeld over here says, because of government spending or roosters. Is he right? He's wrong. Well, he could be wrong. We don't really know. It's very hard for a political scientist to find causation. And causation deals with cause and effect. So it's very hard for political scientists to conclude that graduation rates are increasing because of government spending. Could they be increasing because there's better teachers, or because of the change in the student to staff ratio, or the development of schools, or changes in the curriculum, or maybe these students have parents that motivate them more, or maybe their environments are more motivating or successful, or more makes them more prone to success, or has less distractions, maybe access to the internet or advanced communication and transportation technologies impacts their success rate. There's so many factors that it's very hard for political scientists to pinpoint a single one. Roosters, on the other hand, and sometimes there could be factors that do impact graduation rates, but are very, very unique, a little out of pocket, or they may impact them in a very, very small amounts. So we could say there's correlation between government spending and graduation rates. If we saw a graph that showed government spending was increasing, that's correlation. That's called positive correlation because they're both increasing. But we can't conclude right off the bat that increased government spending increases graduation rates in Nigeria. We could even say that they increase graduation rates in Mexico, but that doesn't mean they increase in Nigeria because they have different tax systems in both countries that impact their government spending. And this writing here, I didn't plan on this writing being here, but this comes down to this little hint of knowledge for you. Correlation does not mean causation. That's something straight out of the course and exam description. You'll hear this in other courses. If you take AP Psychology, you'll hear this. Correlation does not mean causation. Just because there's a correlation doesn't mean that they cause one another. All right, here's another value that you need to be familiar with. Gross domestic product. Now, you don't have to memorize these values, and if you ever take a class in college that asks you to memorize these values, please drop it. These are your values. And you should kind of be familiar that the United Kingdom has the highest GDP. And you should be familiar that Iran has the lowest GDP. And that Nigeria is kind of around Iran. And then Mexico, China, Russia are pretty similar. You want to know that China has a GDP of what's it called? 1,773 billion dollars. And this is in US dollars. So there's 4 factors that impact your gross domestic product, consumption, investments, your net exports, which is your expenditures, and government spending in a country. We're just talking about government spending. So all of these happen within a country, within the borders. So GDP is the sum of all the spending of the goods and services within a country. So this is empirical data. It's a big piece of factual statistics. There's also quantitative data because it's dealing with quantities. And we also have GDP per capita, which is also something the College Board wants you to know. GDP per capita is just the GDP divided by the population. They're probably not going to ask that. They're probably going to give you a graph and ask you a bunch of random stuff about it. And as you can see here, the countries with the higher GDPs have the higher GDP per capita. So that's very interesting to know. That is correlation. Then we have our GDP growth rate. We can also see here that countries with the higher GDPs have higher GDP growth rates, which is also very interesting as well. I mean, look at Nigeria and Iran. They have very low GDP growth rate. Mexico and Iran have the same GDP growth rate, but Mexico's GDP is 4 times as high. Their GDP per capita is 2.5 times as high. So there's definitely some factors impacting their existing GDP, as well as what's happening in the country to change what their GDP is. And in the last unit, we'll discuss political economics, and we'll look at all this some more. So what conclusions can we draw? Well, the UK is the most economically successful. We could probably draw this conclusion just because they have the highest GDP per capita and the highest GDP. Now, China has the highest GDP growth rate, and that's because they're industrializing still to an extent. They've been industrializing forever. The United Kingdom is mostly a service-based economy. China's getting there, though, especially with the capitalist measures that have been taken there recently. But their success certainly isn't as high as the United Kingdom because their GDP and GDP per capita aren't as high yet, despite that high growth rate. They're getting there, though. They certainly are. Now, what else can we draw? China and Russia have similar labor forces because they have high GDP per capita. We can't conclude that. Again, correlation and causation. We can't say that, oh, China and Russia, they have very similar labor forces. No, we could say that maybe wages in the United Kingdom are lower, so they have less money to spend on consumption. We could possibly conclude that, or that could just be something we have to consider in our conclusions, in our analyzation and generalizations and conclusions. Yeah. China could have increased government spending because they have higher taxes. Now, that would also impact your consumption and investment, but we can just forget about that. This is not an economics course. But again, there's so many factors that impact GDP. I mean, we already have these 4 basic ones, and there's so many little factors like business cycles that impact our GDP, that impact our economic growth and our consumption and our investments. Real estate falls under the investment side of GDP, and there's so many little factors like your interest rates and your market size and demand for housing and your types of housing. If you have more apartments and single family homes, how's that going to impact your investment patterns? And those will vary between countries, as well as, your taxes and your trade, because net exports deals with trade. It's imports minus exports. So there's just so much stuff going on. All right, so this is the GINI index. Some people say GINI index. I believe it is the GINI index. And this measures income inequality. So it's another economic measurement. It's more quantitative data because we're dealing with specific numbers here. And this one I gave a key for. You're very, very welcome for this. So the higher the Gini coefficient value, the more income inequality there is. And that's something you have to know. Because they may ask you on the AP exam, what is a higher Gini coefficient value? I mean, they're probably not going to ask you that. They'll ask you to apply it. But you do need to know that a higher value means higher inequality, which means disparity, differences, incomparable. So we can see here that our our least developed countries, I'm looking at really Iran and Nigeria, have higher means of income inequality, while our more developed countries like Mexico, China, and the United Kingdom, Russia, they have lower levels of income inequality. They're really relatively similar to one another. Russia, China, and Mexico have higher inequality than the United Kingdom, but still very similar to one another. Okay, so this is the Fragile States Index. This is also called the Failed States Index. And a failed state is essentially where the government cannot respond to the needs of the people. They cannot respond to maybe domestic or international violence. They are a failed state. They're not serving their purpose as a government anymore. So the country with the highest... Where's Failed States Index? I'm trying to find like the specific values because I didn't provide that to you. So the country with the exact highest on our 6 countries list is Nigeria, and in 2018 it was 99.9. And then our lowest was the United Kingdom, which we can see here. It's very green at 34.3, and it's basically ranking the governmental organizations based off their potential to weaken due to conflicts and domestic turmoil. It has 12 different indicators. They're grouped as like cohesion indicators, economic indicators, political indicators, and then cross-cutting indicators. So yeah, and this really allows for a more in-depth analysis and comparison of our core countries and how their political systems are working. And if there's conflict that they need to resolve that they can't resolve, or their conflict is so severe. In Nigeria, there's a big problem with terrorism, with Muslim terrorism in the north. In Mexico, there's drug cartels. And then in China, well, China's government itself is very corrupt. Communism. So that's just something to consider. A lot of factors that impact this. This isn't something that the AP course really likes to talk about that much, but it's something you need to know. All right, what does Jerry have to say? Greater GDP makes states less fragile. That is wrong. That's more causation. We're not looking at causation here. Yes, maybe we can establish some correlation here that higher GDP is correlated with lower scores on our fragile states index. Because a lower score, that's something you have to know, a lower score on this failed states index indicates that they're less likely to be a failed state. They're less fragile, essentially. So that's correlation we can draw, but we can't conclude that, if we have more GDP, we're going to lower our fragile states index. No, there's so much more that goes into that. And not every aspect of GDP will impact your potential of the government to even do its job. I mean, government spending is part of them, but so is consumption in our GDP, and that's consumer consumption. So me going to the grocery store and buying milk, that's consumption. What does that have to do with how the government functions? It can respond to domestic turmoil. It really doesn't. All right, this is the Freedom Index. I think it's called Freedom House, Freedom International. You may see any of those 3 terms. This is very up to date. Doesn't go up to 2014 or 2018. And again, here we can see that our least developed countries have lower freedom. So our most free country, United Kingdom, I believe our least free country is China, under that communist republic. That's what it's called. The People's Republic of China is the official toponym for China. Let's make some comparisons here between our failed states index and the Freedom House. So there's correlation here. Like I said, a lower score on our fragile states index, our lower, development as well, indicates a higher score of the Freedom International. So countries that are most free typically are less fragile politically. So that is correlation. All right, and this is the Corruption Perceptions Index. And this is 2019. My data here is from 2017. But it's relatively similar. So this essentially... So the Corruption Perceptions Index essentially allows us to assess and rank the perception of corruption in different countries. So basically, which country has the most corruption? And we can see here that Mexico, Nigeria, Russia, Iran have the most corruption out of our 6 countries. United Kingdom with the lowest, and then China's kind of in between there, which is very interesting to say the least. I know, we have so much different measurements. I think this is the last one, though. So, you're welcome for that. If you want to do more, if you want to look at more, there's certainly more you could look at. You could look at gross national product, growth rate. There's, oh my gosh, there's so much that you could look at. If you want to compare these countries and how they're doing, you can literally look at look at graduation rates. That one I showed you was just us practicing reading graphs, but you can definitely look at literacy rates, graduation rates. You can look at just imports and exports. You could look at the size of their military or military spending. I think that falls under, it's called defense spending, if you want to look up the official term for that. So yeah, now what could cause all this corruption in the countries? Well, we're going to cover that. In Mexico, drug cartels is a big one. Nigeria, terrorist corruption. In the north, they have federalism in Nigeria, so there's federal governments that are particularly Muslim that have seen levels of corruption. Their electoral system isn't perfect, which we'll explain. Russia's under one-party dominance, not in the sense that there's only one party ruling Russia, like there is in China, but there's really one party that's running the whole country, and we'll go over that later. Thanks so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. It's free, which means it costs $0, and it really does help me out. Leave a comment down below with any questions. I'll be happy to answer them. There's some links down below in the description with practice tests, key terms, guided notes, all that fun stuff. Head on over to the next AP Comparative video on some really cool political stuff.